The Arizona Territory of the 1870s birthed its share of legendary gunslingers, men like Lightning, Luke Carson, Steel Eye Sam Blackwood, the infamous Cortez brothers, and the dreaded three-shot Tom Reeves. But perhaps none left a more chilling legacy than Michael "Ghost Hand" Sullivan, a quiet bartender credited with sending 31 men to their graves, who once calmly stated, "Some men serve drinks to forget their past. I serve them to remind others of theirs." Join me today as we delve into the story of the man they called Ghost Hand, the silent guardian of Redemption Springs, who proved that the deadliest weapon in the West wasn't the gun on your hip, but the hand that poured your whiskey. Redemption Springs, Arizona Territory, spring of 1875. The town was like many others sprouting up across the frontier, a dusty main street lined with sun-bleached buildings where desperation and opportunity danced together beneath the scorching desert sun. It was the kind of place where fortunes could be made or lost over a game of cards, which is exactly why Michael Sullivan chose it. He arrived on a sweltering April morning, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and what appeared to be a bartender's tool roll. Those who witnessed his arrival would later recall two things: the unusual silver ring he wore on his right hand, and how his eyes seemed to catalogue every detail of his surroundings while barely appearing to move. The townspeople of Redemption Springs were accustomed to drifters and fortune-seekers passing through, but something about Sullivan was different. He carried himself with a peculiar grace that some mistook for caution, moving with an economy of motion that seemed almost choreographed. Marshal James Cooper, a battle-hardened veteran of both the Civil War and the frontier, watched the newcomer from his office porch with growing interest. "There's two kinds of quiet men in this territory," he'd later write in his personal journal, "those who are running from something and those who've stopped running because they've become something worse." Sullivan had the look of the latter. Sarah Chen, owner of the Thirsty Cactus Saloon, was the first to actually engage with the mysterious newcomer. She'd been looking for an experienced bartender ever since her previous one had left for California's goldfields. When Sullivan walked in and inquired about the position, something in his precise movements and careful speech made her hesitate. But it was the way he handled an unexpected bar fight during his trial shift that truly caught her attention. Two miners, drunk on cheap whiskey and old grudges, had drawn knives over a disputed gold claim. Before anyone could blink, Sullivan had somehow materialized between them. His movements were fluid, almost gentle, as he redirected their momentum. In the span of 3 heartbeats, both miners found themselves seated at opposite ends of the bar, their knives mysteriously absent, with fresh drinks before them. Not a single bottle had been disturbed, not a single glass overturned. Sarah hired him on the spot. Dr. Marcus Way, whose practice was conveniently located next door to the saloon, was perhaps the first to notice the oddities in Sullivan's behavior. The way he always positioned himself with a clear view of both entrances, how he polished glasses with his left hand, keeping his right oddly free. The fact that he could recall every patron's preferred drink and exactly how much they'd consumed, yet seemed to forget basic details about his own past. Within a month, Sullivan had transformed the Thirsty Cactus. The saloon became known for its impeccable service, perfectly mixed drinks, and most notably, its strange lack of serious violence. Somehow, trouble always seemed to resolve itself before it truly began. Cards were mysteriously dropped before accusations of cheating could escalate. Angry drunks found themselves outside in the cool night air with no memory of how they got there. But it was Ella Martinez, the local telegraph operator, who first noticed the pattern. Every time Sullivan asked about news from Texas, another story would surface about a notorious gunfighter found dead in mysterious circumstances. "It was the oddest thing," she would later tell Sarah Chen. "He never asked directly about the killings, just about general news. but there was something in his eyes when I mentioned certain names, like he was checking items off a list only he could see. Before we continue with tomorrow's chapter, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If this story touches you, make sure to subscribe. We've got something special coming up that you won't want to miss. The stage was set in Redemption Springs for a tale that would become legend, a quiet bartender with deadly secrets, a town at the crossroads of destiny, and approaching on the horizon, a storm that would shatter the fragile peace. No one yet knew that the man serving drinks with such precise grace had once been known by another name in Texas, a name that still caused hardened gunfighters to wake in cold sweats. The legend of Ghost Hand was about to be reborn, and Redemption Springs would never be the same. Michael Sullivan settled into his role at the Thirsty Cactus with the same methodical precision that marked everything he did. Each bottle on the shelves was positioned at exactly the same angle, each glass cleaned until it sparkled in the desert sunlight that filtered through the saloon's windows. But it was the subtle details that caught the attention of the more observant townsfolk. Clara Thompson, who ran the general store across the street, noticed how he always seemed to have a fresh pot of coffee ready just before the morning stage arrived, as if he knew exactly when travelers would need refreshment. She also couldn't help but observe his peculiar purchasing habits, the way he bought cleaning supplies in bulk but barely any food for himself, how he always seemed to need extra rags for polishing glasses, and most curiously, the small vials of unusual chemicals he'd special order through her store, for cleaning particularly stubborn stains, he'd explain, with that ghost of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. But Clara had seen enough bar supplies in her 20 years of running the store to know these weren't ordinary cleaning solutions. The first real hint of Sullivan's true nature came during a late afternoon in May, when 3 rough-looking riders pulled up outside the Thirsty Cactus. Their horses were lathered with sweat, their clothes covered in trail dust, but their gun belts were suspiciously clean and well-oiled. Marshal Cooper, watching from his usual spot, recognized them immediately. The Jenkins brothers, wanted in 4 territories for robbery and murder. "Something about that new bartender of yours," the eldest Jenkins brother drawled to Sarah Chen as they swaggered into the saloon. "Name sounds familiar. Used to know a Sullivan down Texas way." He left the statement hanging in the air like smoke from his cigar. Sullivan was wiping down the bar when they entered, his movements never faltering. "Welcome to the Thirsty Cactus, gentlemen," he said softly, his voice barely carrying across the room. "What's your pleasure?" The youngest Jenkins brother, Billy, leaned against the bar with a predatory grin. "Heard you make something called a Ghost Hand special. That true?" The saloon went quiet. Even the piano player's fingers froze above the keys. Sullivan's hands stilled on the bar rag for just a fraction of a second. So brief, most would have missed it. But Marshal Cooper, watching from a corner table, saw the tension ripple through the bartender's shoulders like a snake coiling to strike. "Haven't made one of those in years," Sullivan replied, his voice maintaining that same quiet calm. "Special occasion drink. Takes unique ingredients." The middle Jenkins brother, Cal, spat on the floor. "Heard it was your signature back in Texas, before all them accidents started happening. Lot of good men died real strange deaths after having your special drink." Sullivan placed 3 glasses on the bar with precise movements. "You gentlemen seem to have me confused with someone else. We serve standard drinks here. Whiskey? Beer?" "Now see, that's funny," the eldest Jenkins said, his hand dropping casually to his gun belt. "Because my friend Jack Wheeler had one of your specials down in El Paso. Last drink he ever had. Found him the next morning, peaceful as could be. Doctors said his heart just stopped." The atmosphere in the saloon had grown thick with tension. Regular patrons began quietly moving toward the exits, recognizing the familiar dance of violence about to unfold. But Sullivan seemed completely at ease, continuing to polish glasses as if discussing nothing more important than the weather. El Paso was a long time ago, he said softly. Men die of all sorts of things in the territories, especially men like Jack Wheeler. Billy Jenkins' hand twitched toward his gun. That a threat, barkeep? Sullivan placed a bottle on the bar with deliberate care. No, sir. Just an observation. Like how I observe that Marshal Cooper doesn't take kindly to wanted men in his town. Or how I observe that you've got your weight balanced wrong for a quick draw, favoring that leg you injured running from the Rangers last month. The revelation hit the Jenkins brothers like a physical blow. How could a simple bartender know such details? The eldest brother's face darkened with rage, but before he could speak, Sullivan continued in that same quiet voice. I also observe that you've got exactly 10 seconds to leave my bar before I serve something much stronger than whiskey. Your choice, gentlemen. Drinks or consequences? There was something in his tone, a cold certainty that made even hardened killers pause. The Jenkins brothers exchanged glances, their earlier confidence evaporating in the face of this unexpected steel. They backed out of the saloon, trying to maintain their dignity while their instincts screamed at them to run. After they left, Sarah Chen approached the bar, her heart still racing. You know they'll be back, she said quietly. Sullivan nodded, resuming his methodical cleaning of glasses. Yes, but next time they won't be so obvious about it. Men like that, they learn from their mistakes, usually just in time to make bigger ones. Marshal Cooper, who had witnessed the entire exchange, made his way to the bar. Want to tell me what that was really about? Sullivan met his eyes for the first time since arriving in town. Some men come to a bar looking for trouble. Others come carrying it with them. My job is making sure neither type finds what they're looking for. But as the sun set over Redemption Springs, casting long shadows across the dusty street, everyone who had witnessed the confrontation knew one thing for certain. Michael Sullivan was far more than just a simple bartender. The only question was, what kind of storm was brewing on the horizon, and would the town be ready when it broke? The Jenkins brothers' visit had shattered the careful quiet Sullivan had built around himself in Redemption Springs. Whispers began circulating through town, carried on the hot desert wind like tumbleweeds. Stories from Texas, fragments of a past that seemed too bloody to belong to the methodical man who mixed drinks with such precision at the Thirsty Cactus. The first piece of the puzzle arrived in the form of retired Texas Ranger Captain Marcus Hawthorne, who stopped in Redemption Springs on his way to California. The moment he walked into the Thirsty Cactus and saw Sullivan behind the bar, his weathered face turned ashen. He gripped the doorframe for support, as though he'd seen a ghost. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, loud enough for Sarah Chen to hear from her usual spot near the register. "The ghost hand of El Paso. They said you were dead." Sullivan continued polishing a glass, his movements never faltering. "Welcome to Redemption Springs, Captain Hawthorne. Your usual? Bourbon. Neat, if I remember correctly." The old ranger's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, then stopped. 8 years ago in El Paso," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You disappeared after the Cortez massacre. After what they did to your—" "That'll be 2 bits for the bourbon," Sullivan interrupted softly, placing a glass on the bar. The message was clear. Some stories weren't meant to be shared, but Marshal Cooper, seated nearby and keenly aware of the tension between the two men, wasn't about to let this lead slip away. Later that evening, he found Hawthorne at the town's small hotel, nursing another bourbon and lost in memories. "You knew him back then?" Cooper asked, settling into a chair across from the former ranger. Hawthorne took a long drink before answering. "Knew of him. Every lawman in Texas did. Best undercover agent the Rangers ever had. Could walk into any saloon, become part of the scenery. Gathered more intelligence in a week than most men could in a year. Had a way of dealing with problems that couldn't be solved by normal legal means." "The ghost hand special," Cooper prompted. The old ranger's face darkened. Chemical background from the war. Could mix drinks that would stop a man's heart hours later, leave no trace. But that wasn't what made him legendary. It was his speed, that right hand of his, fastest draw I ever saw. Like watching a ghost reach for a gun, hence the name. What happened in El Paso? Hawthorne stared into his glass, as if seeing the past reflected in the amber liquid. He was deep under cover in the Cortez gang, had almost enough evidence to bring them down. But someone talked. They found out who he was, went after his family while he was away, his wife, daughter. They didn't just kill them, they made an example. Sarah Chen, bringing fresh coffee to their table, couldn't help but overhear. The story explained so much about the quiet man who now tended her bar, the precision, the watchfulness, the barely contained violence that seemed to lurk beneath his calm exterior. After that, Hawthorne continued, he disappeared, but over the next 2 years, every member of the Cortez gang died under mysterious circumstances. Heart failures, accidents, sudden illnesses. Never any evidence, just dead men with surprised looks on their faces. Then the killings stopped and the ghost stories began. The following days brought subtle changes to life in Redemption Springs. Regular patrons of the Thirsty Cactus noticed how Sullivan had rearranged the bottles behind the bar, creating clear lines of sight to all approaches. Dr. Way, making his usual evening visit, observed new locks on the back door and tiny mirrors positioned to reflect movement from the street. Clara Thompson reported that Sullivan had ordered new supplies through her store, more of his special chemicals, plus materials that seemed odd for a bartender. Leather-working tools, small mechanical parts, things that spoke of preparation rather than mere business. Most telling was how Sullivan had begun teaching Sarah Chen to mix specific drinks. Some combinations, he explained quietly, aren't just about taste, they're about timing. He showed her how certain mixtures, when properly prepared, could cause effects ranging from sudden sleep to temporary paralysis. Knowledge worth having, he added, when trouble comes looking for a drink, but it was Ella Martinez who brought the most disturbing news. Telegram traffic had increased dramatically in recent weeks. Messages passing between Texas and Arizona spoke of movement. The remnants of the Cortez gang, scattered but not destroyed, were regrouping under new leadership. And they were asking questions about Redemption Springs. "They're hunting ghosts," Sullivan remarked when Sarah shared this information, his voice carrying that deadly calm she'd come to recognize as his most dangerous mood. Question is, are they ready to find one? Marshal Cooper, watching Sullivan's preparations with growing concern, finally confronted him one quiet evening. "You're expecting trouble." Sullivan paused in his work, those careful hands absolutely still for once. "Trouble's been coming since the day I arrived, Marshal. The Jenkins brothers were just scouts. The real storm is still gathering." "This is my town, Sullivan. I need to know what we're facing." The bartender was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something distant. "The Cortez gang isn't just coming for me. They're coming to make another example, to show what happens to anyone who helps a ghost." "Then maybe it's time you moved on," Cooper suggested, though his tone held no real conviction. Sullivan's smile was sharp as broken glass. 8 years ago I ran. Let them think they'd won. Let them think the ghost was just a story to frighten children. But some stories don't end, Marshal. They just wait for the right moment to begin again. As night fell over Redemption Springs, the town seemed to hold its breath. Change was coming, carried on the wind like the scent of rain before a storm. The quiet bartender had brought his ghosts with him, and soon everyone would learn why some legends are best left undisturbed. The first signs of trouble arrived with the evening stage, just as the desert sun was painting the mountains in shades of blood and gold. 3 men stepped down into the dusty street of Redemption Springs, their clothes too fine for ordinary travelers, their eyes scanning the town with predatory intent. They moved with the coordinated precision of wolves, hunting in a pack, making their way directly to the Silver Dollar Hotel. Lily Wong, whose laundry service gave her eyes and ears throughout the town, noticed how they'd positioned themselves in the hotel's second-floor rooms, each with a clear view of the Thirsty Cactus's entrances. "Not just gunmen," she reported to Marshal Cooper later that evening. "These ones are different, professional, military-trained, by the way they carry themselves." The marshal had already spotted the telltale signs, the way they checked sight lines, how they established overlapping fields of fire. "Pinkertons?" he asked Sullivan, who was methodically preparing the bar for the evening crowd. "Worse," Sullivan replied softly, his hands never pausing in their work. "Cortez hired Santiago Vasquez and his brothers, ex-cavalry scouts turned manhunters. They specialize in complex operations, coordinated attacks. They're here to plan, not fight. Not yet." Sarah Chen felt her blood run cold. Everyone in the territories had heard of the Vasquez brothers. They'd made their reputation hunting down Confederate guerrillas after the war, becoming famous for elaborate traps and coordinated ambushes. "How many more will come?" she asked. "Depends on how much Santiago remembers," Sullivan answered, that ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "Last time we met, I gave him that distinctive limp he's trying so hard to hide. Might make this personal." Throughout the week, more strangers trickled into Redemption Springs. They arrived in ones and twos, taking rooms at the hotel or setting up camp outside town. Some posed as traders, others as miners or drifters. But all of them carried the same watchful eyes and well-worn gun belts. Dr. Wei, treating a supposed prospector's sprained wrist, noticed the calluses on the man's hands, not from mining picks, but from rifle stocks and pistol grips. Clara Thompson reported unusual purchases, ammunition bought in small amounts from different stores to avoid attention, materials that could be used for explosives, supplies that spoke of preparation for a prolonged operation. Sullivan watched it all with his characteristic calm, but subtle changes appeared in the Thirsty Cactus. New bottles appeared on the shelves, their contents a mystery to anyone but him. The mirrors on the walls were adjusted daily, creating a complex network of reflected views. Regular patrons found themselves gently guided to specific tables, leaving certain areas conspicuously open. "He's arranging the battlefield," Marshal Cooper realized one evening, watching Sullivan's precise movements, "turning the whole saloon into a trap." The tension reached its peak when Santiago Vasquez himself finally walked into the Thirsty Cactus, his silver-tipped cane clicking against the wooden floor. The usual evening crowd fell silent, watching the drama unfold. Sullivan stood behind the bar, as still as a statue, his right hand resting casually on a towel. "Don't suppose you'd fix me a ghost hand special?" Santiago asked, his accent thick with mockery. "For old time's sake." "We serve simpler drinks these days," Sullivan replied quietly, "less likely to disagree with a man's constitution." Santiago's laugh held no humor. "You've grown soft, Ghost, hiding behind a bar, serving drinks to dirt farmers and cowboys. The great ghost hand of El Paso, reduced to this." "Yet here you are," Sullivan observed, "bringing an army to face one simple bartender. Makes me wonder who's really afraid of ghosts, Santiago." The manhunter's face darkened. "The Cortez family sends their regards. They've waited 8 years to repay their debt to you. This time, there will be nowhere to hide. No more witnesses to your tricks. Just a tragic accident in a frontier saloon, like what happened to my family." Sullivan's voice remained soft, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Tell me, Santiago, do you still wake up at night remembering the screams? Do you see their faces in your dreams?" Santiago's hand tightened on his cane. "We all make choices, Ghost. You chose to betray the family. They chose to make an example, and now—" He gestured expansively. "You've chosen to endanger everyone in this town. Their blood will be on your hands." "No," Sullivan replied, And for the first time since arriving in Redemption Springs, real emotion colored his voice. "Their blood will be on yours, same as before. Only this time," his right hand moved slightly, causing Santiago to flinch, "this time I won't disappear when it's over." The manhunter backed away, maintaining his dignity despite the fear evident in his eyes. At the door, he turned for a final word. 3 days, Ghost. Get your affairs in order. Make peace with whatever god you believe in, because when we're done, there won't be enough left of you to haunt anyone." After he left, Sarah Chen approached the bar. "Michael," she said softly, using his first name for the first time, "what are we going to do?" Sullivan's hands had already resumed their methodical work, but there was a new tension in his movements. "We're going to serve drinks, Sarah, and then we're going to teach some old ghosts why they should have stayed buried." As night fell over Redemption Springs, the town seemed to hold its breath. In the growing darkness, shadows moved with purpose, pieces being positioned on an invisible chessboard. The quiet bartender had brought war to their doorstep, but as Marshal Cooper would later write in his journal, sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones that gather in silence. The 3 days Santiago had promised felt like a countdown to an execution. Redemption Springs, normally bustling with the everyday rhythms of frontier life, took on the eerie quiet of a town holding its breath. The desert wind carried whispers of approaching violence, and even the most hardened locals found themselves watching the shadows with wary eyes. Dr. Wei noticed the change first in his morning rounds. The streets were too empty, the usual gossip replaced by hurried conversations behind closed doors. Families were sending their children to stay with relatives in nearby towns. Those who couldn't leave were stockpiling supplies, preparing for a siege they could feel coming but couldn't quite name. At the Thirsty Cactus, Sullivan's preparations took on an almost ritualistic precision. The casual observer might have missed the subtle changes, but Sarah Chen saw them all. Extra bottles appeared behind the bar, their contents mysteriously cloudy. Small mechanisms were installed beneath tables and along doorframes. Even the sawdust on the floor was spread in specific patterns, creating what looked like casual drifts but felt deliberately placed. "You're not just preparing for a fight," she observed one morning, watching him adjust a mirror for the 3rd time. "You're building something bigger." Sullivan paused, his hands hovering over the glass. "Every bar fight has a rhythm," he said softly. "Men telegraph their moves, in their stance, their eyes, the way they grip their glass. What works for one man works for 20. It's all about understanding the dance." Marshal Cooper, making his rounds, stepped into the saloon just in time to hear this explanation. "And how many partners are you expecting at this dance?" "Santiago's brought at least 30 men to town," Sullivan replied, resuming his work. "More arriving daily, but numbers aren't what concerns me." He adjusted another mirror, creating a complex web of reflected angles. "It's their experience. These aren't common thugs. They're hunters, professionals. They'll have studied the stories, learned from others' mistakes." "Like the Jenkins brothers?" Sarah asked. A ghost of a smile touched Sullivan's lips. "The Jenkins boys were just testing the waters. Santiago's men will be different. They'll come with a plan, coordinated attacks, multiple angles. They'll try to deny me the shadows, force me into the open." The marshal leaned against the bar, his weathered face creased with concern. "Maybe it's time you told us the whole story, not just El Paso, but everything. If my town's going to become a battlefield, we deserve to know why." Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, his hands finally still on the polished wood. "Fair enough," he said at last, "but not here. Too many ears in the walls." That evening, after closing, a small group gathered in the saloon's back room. Marshal Cooper, Sarah Chen, Dr. Wei, Clara Thompson, and Lily Wong. Sullivan stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the desert moonlight. "I wasn't always a ranger," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. During the war, I worked with the Army's Chemical Corps, learned how certain combinations could affect the human body, slow the heart, dull the senses, stop breathing. After the war, the Rangers recruited me for special operations. My job was to infiltrate gangs, gather intelligence, and when necessary, eliminate problems that couldn't be handled through normal channels. He turned to face them, and for the first time, they saw the weight of history in his eyes. The Cortez family controlled everything from El Paso to Tucson. Drugs, guns, protection rackets. I spent 2 years working my way into their organization. Got close enough to gather evidence that would have destroyed them. But someone talked. Sarah noticed his right hand flex unconsciously, the silver ring catching the lamplight. They came while I was away, he continued. Made an example of my family, but they made a mistake. They left me alive thinking the ghost was just a story, a legend to scare children. They forgot that some ghosts don't rest, some ghosts wait and watch and remember. And now they've found you again, Marshal Cooper said quietly. Sullivan nodded. They're not just coming for revenge. They're coming to erase the legend, to prove that the ghost hand was just a man after all. And they'll kill anyone who stands in their way. Clara Thompson, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Those chemicals you've been ordering, you're planning something bigger than just defending the bar, aren't you? Every hunter has patterns, Sullivan replied. Santiago's men will come at dawn, their preferred time for raids. They'll expect me to fight like I did in Texas, using shadows and stealth. So instead, he gestured to the various bottles and mechanisms around the room. We're going to change the rules of the game. Dr. Wei studied the setup with professional interest. These mixtures, they're not just for show. You're creating a controlled environment. The whole saloon is the weapon, Sullivan confirmed. Every bottle, every mirror, every handful of sawdust. When they come, they'll be stepping into a trap 8 years in the making. And what about the town? Marshal Cooper demanded. What about innocent people caught in the crossfire? Sullivan's expression softened slightly. That's why I'm telling you this now. I need your help to keep people clear when it starts. The thirsty cactus has to become a killing ground, but the rest of Redemption Springs doesn't have to share its fate. As the group dispersed into the night, each carrying their own piece of the plan, Sarah lingered behind. Why here? She asked finally. Why choose this town, this saloon? Sullivan's hand traced the familiar grain of the bar, his voice distant with memory. Because some ghosts need a home, and some legends deserve a proper ending. Outside, the desert wind carried the first hints of dawn, and with it, the approaching sound of hoofbeats. The storm was gathering, and Redemption Springs was about to learn why the ghost hand of El Paso had become more than just a story to frighten children in the dark. Dawn crept over Redemption Springs like a fever, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The air hung thick with tension, broken only by the occasional jangle of spurs or whisper of leather on steel as Santiago's men moved into position. They came in groups of 3 and 4, taking up carefully planned positions around the thirsty cactus. Professional killers all, they moved with the practiced precision of men who had done this many times before. Marshal Cooper, watching from his office window, counted at least 20 men visible on the street. More in the alleys, he muttered to Deputy Williams. Probably got the rooftops covered too. Better get our people clear. In the thirsty cactus, Sullivan moved through his morning routine with methodical calm. Each bottle was checked, each glass positioned just so. Sarah Chen, who had refused to leave despite his insistence, watched him prepare for war with the same careful attention he gave to mixing drinks. Last chance to walk away, he told her softly, adjusting a mirror for the final time. This is my saloon too, she replied firmly. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't break all my good glasses. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but before he could respond, the first move was made. 3 of Santiago's men burst through the front door, guns drawn, expecting to catch the ghost off guard. Instead, they found an empty bar, Sullivan nowhere in sight. "Check the back," the leader ordered, his voice tight with tension. But as they moved deeper into the saloon, the trap began to unfold. A bottle shattered near the ceiling, releasing a fine mist that caught the morning light streaming through the windows. The men cursed, raising their bandanas to their faces, but it was already too late. The specially prepared mixture wasn't toxic, it was a catalyst, designed to react with the treated sawdust under their feet. The first man stumbled, his legs suddenly unresponsive. The second found his gun hand cramping, fingers refusing to obey commands. The third managed to fire a single shot before his vision blurred, the carefully arranged mirrors multiplying every shadow into a dozen potential threats. Sullivan emerged from nowhere and everywhere, his movements liquid smooth. The first man went down to a precise strike to the neck, the second to a throw that sent him crashing into his own reflection. The third had time to realize that the ghost's reputation wasn't built on speed alone before darkness claimed him. Outside, the sound of gunfire brought Santiago's main force rushing in, but Sullivan had spent months preparing for this moment. Each entrance had its own surprise, chemical tripwires, strategically placed mirrors that turned the morning sun into a blinding weapon, floors treated to become treacherous when wet. Dr. Way, treating the wounded that made it back out, would later describe the scene. It wasn't a gunfight in any traditional sense. It was more like a choreographed dance of chemistry and physics with Sullivan as the conductor. In the chaos, Santiago himself made his move, leading a team through the back entrance. They found Sullivan waiting by the bar, his right hand resting casually on a lined-up row of bottles. "Impressive setup, Ghost," Santiago called out, his men spreading out to cover all angles. "But your tricks won't work on all of us. Some of us remember Texas." "Then you should remember this," Sullivan replied softly, his hand moving in that legendary blur. But instead of drawing a gun, he sent the bottles spinning across the bar. Each one shattered in a precise location. Sarah, watching from her hidden position behind the bar, saw why they called him Ghost Hand. In the swirling mist, his movements seemed to defy natural law, appearing in one spot only to materialize in another. Every punch, every throw was calculated to use his opponent's confusion against them. Santiago, coughing in the chemical haze, barely saw the shadow that relieved him of his gun. "You've learned new tricks," he gasped as Sullivan's hand closed on his collar. "No," Sullivan replied quietly, "just perfected the old ones." The strike was quick and precise, not fatal, but enough to ensure Santiago wouldn't be troubling anyone for a while. When Marshal Cooper's men finally entered the saloon, they found 13 of Santiago's professionals unconscious or disabled, scattered among broken glass and spilled liquor. The chemical fog was already dissipating, drawn out through cleverly placed vents, and there was Sullivan, calmly wiping down the bar as if nothing had happened. "Got some cleanup to do," he remarked to Sarah, who emerged from her hiding spot shaking her head in amazement. "I'd say you've got some explaining to do," Marshal Cooper added, surveying the scene. "Starting with what was in those bottles." Sullivan's smile was tired, but genuine. "Trade secrets, Marshal. But I'd suggest getting Dr. Way to look at these men soon. They'll live, but they might have interesting dreams for a few days." As the morning progressed, word spread through Redemption Springs about the battle at the Thirsty Cactus. But this was just the opening move in a larger game. Santiago's defeat would bring others, harder men, more desperate measures. The Ghost's legend had grown again, but with it came a price. Sarah found Sullivan later that evening, preparing fresh bottles to replace those destroyed in the fight. "They'll come again, won't they?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he replied, his hands never pausing in their work. "But next time they'll be desperate, and desperate men make the biggest mistakes. The sun set over Redemption Springs, painting the mountains in colors of fire and blood. The first battle was over, but the war for the soul of the town was just beginning. And in the growing darkness, a ghost prepared for the next dance with death. The aftermath of the battle at the Thirsty Cactus rippled through Redemption Springs like waves in a desert mirage. Dr. Way's clinic overflowed with Santiago's men, most suffering from the mysterious effects of Sullivan's chemical concoctions. The doctor noted with professional interest how each mixture had been carefully calibrated, debilitating but not lethal, precise in both effect and duration. "Never seen anything like it," he told Marshal Cooper as they watched Sullivan's victims slowly recover. "Some of them swear they saw ghosts multiplying in the mirrors. Others couldn't tell up from down, but not a single fatal injury among them." Word of the ghost's victory spread through the territories like wildfire, carried by telegraph and whispered in saloons from El Paso to Tombstone. The story grew with each telling, how one man had defeated 13 professional killers using nothing but mirrors and mist, how the legendary ghost hand had transformed a simple saloon into a maze of chemical warfare. But in Redemption Springs itself, the mood was far from celebratory. Sarah Chen supervised repairs to the Thirsty Cactus, noting how Sullivan had even planned for the aftermath. Most of the damaged furniture and fixtures had been carefully positioned to be sacrificial, protecting the saloon's more vital elements. "You knew exactly where they would shoot," she observed, watching him install a new mirror. Every broken bottle, every shattered glass. It was all planned. Sullivan's hands moved with their usual precision, adjusting the angle just so. Men like Santiago are predictable. They follow patterns, training. The trick isn't just knowing what they'll do, it's making them do it where and when you choose. Lily Wong, whose network of eyes and ears throughout town had been invaluable in tracking Santiago's men, brought the first warnings of new trouble brewing. Riders were gathering in the outlying areas, harder men than Santiago's professionals. The Cortez family was calling in every marker, every favor owed. "They're offering double bounties," she reported during a private meeting in the saloon's back room. "Not just for you, Sullivan, but for anyone who helps you. They're trying to turn the town against itself." Marshal Cooper stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Already seeing signs of it. Some folks are talking about asking Sullivan to leave, thinking that'll solve the problem." "It won't," Sullivan said quietly, his hands still as stone on the bar. "The Cortez family doesn't leave witnesses. Whether I stay or go, they'll make an example of Redemption Springs now, just like they did with my family. Clara Thompson, who had been quietly supplying Sullivan with chemicals while maintaining her cover as a simple shopkeeper, spoke up. "Then maybe it's time we made an example of our own." All eyes turned to her in surprise. The usually proper businesswoman's face was set with determination. 8 years ago you fought alone," she continued. "But this isn't just your fight anymore. This is our town, our home." Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "What you're suggesting? It would mean crossing lines that can't be uncrossed. Becoming something different." "We already have," Sarah Chen interjected. "The moment we chose to stand with you, we became part of your ghost story. Might as well make it a good one." Over the next few days, Redemption Springs began to change. Under Sullivan's guidance, the entire town became an extension of his carefully planned battlefield. Clara's store supplied materials for more of his special mixtures. Lily's network of informants expanded, creating an early warning system that covered every approach to town. Dr. Way studied Sullivan's chemical formulas, learning to prepare antidotes and treatments. Even Marshal Cooper found himself adapting his law enforcement strategies to incorporate Sullivan's methods. "Never thought I'd see the day," he remarked, watching his deputies practice with mirrors and smoke signals, turning the whole town into one big ghost hand special. But it was Sarah Chen who perhaps understood best what was really happening. She found Sullivan late one night, meticulously preparing new bottles in the saloon's back room. "You're not just teaching us to fight," she said, watching his hands move with their familiar precision. "You're creating a legacy." Sullivan paused, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. 8 years ago, I learned that one man's vengeance isn't enough. Ghosts fade, legends die, but a community that knows how to defend itself, that can haunt men's nightmares forever. As if to underscore his words, a rider arrived the next morning with news that chilled even Sullivan's calculated calm. Victor Cortez himself, the family's youngest and most brutal son, was personally leading the next wave of attackers. Unlike Santiago's precise military operation, Victor was known for overwhelming force and complete destruction. "He'll come with fire and numbers," Sullivan told his impromptu war council. "He won't care about collateral damage. In fact, he'll welcome it." "How many?" Marshal Cooper asked. "If it's really Victor, at least 50 men, probably more. And they won't be professionals like Santiago's crew. They'll be desperados, men with nothing to lose." The implications hung heavy in the air. Santiago's defeat had been surgical, controlled. What was coming would be anything but. "Then we'll be ready," Sarah said firmly, and around the room heads nodded in agreement. Redemption Springs was no longer just a town. It was becoming something new, a community forged in the crucible of coming violence. As night fell over the desert, lights flickered in windows and shadows moved with purpose. The ghost's methods were spreading, teaching others to become shadows themselves. Victor Cortez was coming to face one man, but he would find instead a town full of ghosts, each ready to defend their home with all the tricks that Sullivan had perfected over his years of vengeance. The legend of the Ghost Hand was about to evolve into something much more dangerous. A legend with roots, with purpose, with a family to protect once again. News of Victor Cortez's approach spread through Redemption Springs like wildfire in dry grass. Unlike his predecessor Santiago, who had tried to maintain some semblance of secrecy, Victor made no attempt to hide his coming. His men rode openly through frontier towns, burning and pillaging as they came, leaving a trail of destruction that served as both warning and promise. 57 men at last count, Lily Wong reported during an emergency meeting at the Thirsty Cactus. Most of them border raiders and bandits. They're burning every town that refuses to supply them, making examples as they come. Sullivan stood at his usual place behind the bar, his hands methodically cleaning glasses, even as his mind worked through the implications. "Victor was always the most volatile of the Cortez brothers," he said softly. "Likes to make a show of his violence. It's not enough for him to win. He needs everyone to watch it happen." Marshal Cooper spread out a map of the territory on the bar. "They're following the old stage route. At their current pace, they'll reach us by tomorrow night." "No," Sullivan corrected, his voice carrying that deadly certainty they'd all come to recognize. "They'll wait for dawn. Victor may be volatile, but he's superstitious, believes a ghost's power is weakest at sunrise." Sarah Chen studied the map thoughtfully. "Can we use that? Turn his beliefs against him like you did with Santiago?" A ghost of a smile touched Sullivan's lips. "Already planning on it. But this won't be like last time. Santiago's men were professionals. They could be outthought, outmaneuvered. Victor's raiders are different. They're like rabid dogs, dangerous because they don't care if they survive the fight." Throughout the day, Redemption Springs transformed itself according to Sullivan's master plan. Clara Thompson's store became an impromptu chemistry lab, producing batch after batch of his special mixtures. Dr. Wei modified the formulas, creating new variants designed for larger groups and outdoor use. Even the town's children were put to work, spreading treated sawdust along carefully marked routes. But the most remarkable change was in the townspeople themselves. Under Sullivan's guidance, ordinary citizens became part of an elaborate defensive network. Shop owners installed mirrors at precise angles, creating a web of reflected signals visible only to those who knew where to look. Lily's laundry workers developed a code using hung sheets to indicate enemy movements. Even the local piano player learned to incorporate warning rhythms into his usual tunes. "You're not just defending the town," Marshal Cooper observed, watching Sullivan coordinate these preparations. "You're teaching it to become something new." "A ghost can die," Sullivan replied quietly, adjusting a mirror to catch the setting sun. "But a town that learns to haunt itself, that's something that can last." As night fell, the first refugees arrived from outlying farms, bringing fresh reports of Victor's approach. His army had swollen to nearly 70 men, drawing every desperado and cutthroat in the territory, with promises of revenge and riches. Sarah found Sullivan in the back room of the Thirsty Cactus, making final adjustments to his arsenal of bottles and chemicals. "This isn't just about your family anymore, is it?" she asked. He paused in his work, studying the silver ring on his right hand. 8 years ago, I learned the hard way that vengeance isn't enough. The Cortez family didn't just kill my wife and daughter, they destroyed a home, a future, a chance at peace. I've been hunting their ghosts ever since, but maybe—" He gestured to the town beyond the windows, where ordinary people were preparing to defend their home with extraordinary means. "Maybe this is what I was really looking for all along." Dawn approached with the inexorable patience of a desert sunrise. Victor's men had made camp just beyond the town limits, their campfires visible in the pre-morning gloom. They were making no attempt at stealth. The fires were too numerous, the voices too loud. It was a show of force meant to intimidate, but Redemption Springs waited in practiced silence. Every window held watching eyes, every shadow concealed careful preparations. Sullivan's methods had spread through the town like a quiet contagion, turning the entire community into an extension of his carefully planned battlefield. In the Thirsty Cactus, Sarah Chen made a final check of their preparations. The specially treated bottles were in position, the mirrors aligned just so. Even the newly repaired furniture had been arranged according to Sullivan's precise instructions, creating subtle channels and choke points that would funnel attackers exactly where he wanted them. "Victor will come himself," Sullivan said softly, watching the sky begin to lighten. "His pride won't let him send others to kill a ghost. He'll want to be the one to do it, to prove the legends wrong." "Then let's give him a legend worth remembering," Sarah replied, taking her position behind the bar. As the first rays of sun touched the mountains, a new sound carried across the desert, the thunder of hooves, the jingle of spurs, the war cries of men who thought they were coming to destroy a ghost. But what they would find was something far more dangerous, a town that had learned to become its own kind of haunting. The storm was about to break over Redemption Springs, and with it would come a reckoning 8 years in the making. The ghost's methods had taken root in fertile soil, and Victor Cortez was about to learn why some legends are best left undisturbed. Victor Cortez and his army hit Redemption Springs like a desert sandstorm, all fury and blind violence. They came with the rising sun at their backs, just as Sullivan had predicted, thinking the dawn would weaken the ghost they hunted. 73 men strong, they thundered down Main Street expecting to find a terrified town awaiting its execution. Instead, they found silence. Empty streets stretched before them, buildings dark and still in the morning light. Even the ever-present desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Victor, riding at the head of his men on a midnight black stallion, felt the first stirring of unease. "Something's wrong," his lieutenant muttered, eyeing the 2 quiet buildings. "This doesn't feel right," Victor spat in the dust. "The ghost has scared them all into hiding. Spread out, find them. I want this town to burn." His men began dismounting, spreading through the streets with the practiced ease of predators. But as they moved deeper into town, Sullivan's carefully laid trap began to unfold. The first sign that something was amiss came when a group of raiders kicked in the door of Clara Thompson's store. They found the interior filled with a strange, cloudy haze. Before they could retreat, hidden fans activated, spreading the treated vapor into the street. Men began coughing, their eyes watering, their sense of direction suddenly unreliable. "Can't see straight," one of them panicked. "The buildings, they're moving." Similar scenes played out across town. Each building had been prepared with its own surprises. Chemical tripwires, treated sawdust that became treacherously slick when wet, mirrors positioned to turn the morning sun into a blinding weapon. Even the town's waterworks had been modified, with Sullivan's mixtures added to strategic reservoirs. From her vantage point in the church tower, Lily Wong coordinated the town's defense using her network of signals. Hanging laundry shifted in complex patterns, warning defenders of enemy movements. The piano player in the saloon struck specific chords that carried through the streets, each sequence conveying vital information to those who knew the code. Marshal Cooper and his deputies, their tactics modified by Sullivan's training, moved like ghosts themselves through the chaos. They struck from shadows, disappeared into seemingly solid walls, used the treated vapor to create the illusion of being everywhere at once. "It's not just the ghost," one of Victor's men screamed before succumbing to a particularly potent mixture. "The whole damn town is haunted." Victor Cortez, watching his carefully planned attack dissolve into confusion, felt rage replace his initial unease. "Enough of these tricks!" he roared, spurring his horse toward the thirsty cactus. "The ghost dies today!" He burst through the saloon doors with 6 of his most trusted men, guns drawn, expecting to find Sullivan waiting behind the bar. Instead, they found Sarah Chen, calmly polishing glasses. "Welcome to the thirsty cactus, gentlemen," she said, in a perfect imitation of Sullivan's quiet tone. "What's your pleasure?" "Where is he?" Victor demanded, his gun trained on her heart. "The ghost? Oh, he's around." She smiled, setting down her glass with deliberate care. "Would you like to see one of his specialties?" Before Victor could respond, she dropped behind the bar. Simultaneously, the saloon's elaborate system of mirrors and mechanisms activated. Morning sunlight, reflected and amplified, filled the room with dazzling patterns. Bottles began to fall, seemingly of their own accord, their contents mixing in the air to create Sullivan's signature fog. "Kill her!" Victor ordered, but his men were already succumbing to the chemical haze. They fired blindly, their shots splintering mirrors and bottles but hitting nothing vital. Each broken container only added to the confusion, releasing new compounds into the air. Through the swirling mist, Sullivan's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. 8 years, Victor, 8 years I've waited for this moment." Victor spun, firing at shadows. "Show yourself, ghost. Face me like a man." "Like you faced my family?" The voice moved, impossible to track. "Like your men faced a woman and child." Another shot, another miss. Victor's remaining men were on the floor now, caught between consciousness and chemical sleep. "They died screaming," he taunted, trying to draw Sullivan out, "begging for mercy, just like you'll beg before I'm done." "No, Victor." The voice was behind him now, terrifyingly close. "The only one who'll beg today is you." Victor whirled, but Sullivan was faster. The legendary ghost hand moved with impossible speed, disarming the youngest Cortez before he could squeeze the trigger. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration. Every move Sullivan made was precise, calculated, designed not just to hurt, but to humiliate. "This is for my wife," he said softly, shattering Victor's knee with a precise strike. "For my daughter." Another blow, this time to the arm holding the gun. For 8 years of nightmares. A final strike that left Victor gasping on the floor. When Marshal Cooper's men finally entered the saloon, they found Victor Cortez and his lieutenants unconscious, bound with their own gun belts. Sullivan stood at the bar, calmly mixing drinks as if nothing had happened. "Got some prisoners for you, Marshal." he said quietly. "And evidence, too. Victor was kind enough to confess to some old murders. Several witnesses heard him." Outside, the morning fog was beginning to clear, revealing the full extent of Redemption Springs' victory. Victor's army lay scattered through the streets, most sleeping peacefully from Sullivan's compounds, others bound and subdued by townspeople who had learned to be their own kind of ghosts. Sarah emerged from behind the bar, surveying the damage. "Think they'll send anyone else?" Sullivan's smile held a new warmth, one that reached his eyes for the first time since arriving in Redemption Springs. "No, the Cortez family's pride won't survive this. Their reputation was built on fear, and now—" He gestured to the town that had become his greatest creation. "Now they're the ones who are afraid." The legend of the Ghost Hand had evolved into something larger than one man's vengeance. It had become the story of a town that learned to haunt itself, of ordinary people who discovered they could become extraordinary when they stood together. But as the sun climbed higher over Redemption Springs, even this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new kind of legend. 1 year after Victor Cortez's defeat, Redemption Springs had changed in ways that few could have predicted. The thirsty cactus still stood at the heart of town, but it had become something more than just a saloon. Travelers from across the territories whispered about the place where a ghost taught a town to haunt itself, where ordinary citizens moved like shadows, and secrets were passed through the reflection of mirrors. Sullivan remained behind his bar, still quiet, still watching, but something had shifted in his demeanor. The weight of his past seemed lighter now, balanced by the presence of a new kind of family. Sarah Chen had become more than just his employer. She was his partner in every sense, their shared experience during the battle, having forged a bond that went beyond words. "Hard to believe it's been a year," she said one evening, watching him prepare his special mixtures with his usual precision. "Sometimes I wonder if Victor's defeat really changed anything." "It changed everything," Sullivan replied softly, his hands moving with practiced grace. "The Cortez family's empire crumbled after his capture. Their reputation was built on fear, and you can't fear what you can defeat. News had spread throughout the territories. Victor's confession, obtained during his moment of rage, had provided enough evidence to dismantle the Cortez organization. The family's former associates, eager to avoid a similar fate, had turned on each other like starving wolves. But the real changes were more subtle. Dr. Wei's clinic had become a center for studying Sullivan's chemical formulas, developing new medicines from his less lethal compounds. Clara Thompson's store now had a special section for home defense supplies, though only trusted customers knew what that really meant. Marshal Cooper had incorporated Sullivan's methods into his regular law enforcement, creating a network of citizen observers who could track trouble before it started. "Never thought I'd see the day," he remarked, watching his deputies practice with mirrors and smoke signals, "when the law would learn from a ghost." Lily Wong's laundry service had expanded, her network of informants stretching across 3 territories. The coded messages hidden in hanging sheets had become a recognized symbol, a warning to those who might think about bringing trouble to Redemption Springs. One cool autumn evening, as sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Samuel Hawthorne returned to town. The retired Texas Ranger found Sullivan at his usual post behind the bar. "Heard what happened with the Cortez family," Hawthorne said, settling onto a bar stool. "Heard how you turned a whole town into an extension of your legend. Got me thinking about something." Sullivan paused in his work, waiting. "Been talking to the governor. He's starting a new kind of law enforcement unit, one that specializes in problems that can't be solved by normal means. Thought you might be interested in helping to train them." For a long moment, Sullivan was silent, his right hand absently touching the silver ring he still wore. "I've got responsibilities here now," he said finally. "Not asking you to leave," Hawthorne clarified, "just to share what you know. Help others learn what you've taught this town." Sullivan glanced around the saloon, at Sarah managing the books, at the mirrors positioned just so, at the bottles containing his special mixtures, at the home he'd found when he'd stopped running from his ghosts. "Might be able to arrange something," he said quietly. "After all, every ghost needs apprentices." As night fell over Redemption Springs, lights twinkled in windows like earthbound stars. In darkened doorways, citizens moved with practiced stealth, maintaining their watch over the town that had become more than just a community. It had become a symbol, a warning to those who would prey on the innocent. The legend of the ghost hand had evolved one final time. What began as one man's quest for vengeance had become a legacy of protection, a testament to the power of ordinary people standing together against the darkness. Sullivan's methods had spread beyond the town's borders, creating a new kind of frontier justice, one that moved in shadows, spoke in whispers, and taught the wicked to fear the dark. In the Thirsty Cactus, Sullivan continued his quiet work, mixing drinks and keeping watch. The ghost had finally found peace, not by exorcising his demons, but by transforming them into something greater than himself. His family's killers were gone, but their memory lived on in every mirror, every shadow, every carefully prepared mixture that protected his new home. "Some legends die," he had once told Sarah, "but others evolve. They become something more than stories. They become promises." And in Redemption Springs, that promise was kept, night after night, by a quiet bartender with a silver ring, and the town that had learned to become its own kind of haunting. The ghost's war was over, but his legacy had only just begun, for in the end, the most powerful spirits aren't those that linger in graveyards or haunt abandoned buildings. They're the ones that live in the hearts of people who stand together, who learn to protect their own, who turn their fear into strength and their pain into purpose. And somewhere in the territories, in a dusty saloon where mirrors catch the light just so, a ghost still serves drinks to those who are wise enough to respect the legends of the West. But now he serves them with a smile, knowing that his greatest victory wasn't in revenge, but in finding a new kind of family to protect. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments, what would you order at the Thirsty Cactus?